I don't know what
I
happened. It
don't
just
know.
pooped itself.
Technical difficulties are a sign of progress. I have them all the time.
With your mind or with things that you operate?
Yes.
Take that as
Uh,
both.
if it's your computer, it's maybe something to do with the fact that it's from 2012. But
I'm truly aging like a fine wine.
The fact that you got that thing back up and running again is amazing. It just healed itself.
Yeah,
So
exactly. That's the
completely
secret.
crapped out, dead, and then
just like
randomly
last
started
decade,
working
and
again.
it'll be back in fashion. And it'll be running faster than ever.
Yeah.
So technology is like bell-bottom jeans, right? Like it just is cyclical. It just comes back.
We're gonna be just vibing the Windows 10 in 10 years. We're gonna be so jealous that I still have Windows 10.
Face.
Well, they'll make that
Honestly.
illegal, and you'll go to prison for it.
I saw a Wii and a Wii U at a garage sale. I think they were like $60 a pop. Like if I was a more, I don't know. I hate arbitraging on things or selling things, but like you know for a fact those things are going to end up being worth like $300 or $400 in the future. People
Yeah,
are
they probably will.
ridiculous about old electronic consoles, and the Wii is so many people's like formative console. And Nintendo fanboys, like it's just a match made in heaven.
Should have got your brother bought them all. He
And the
lives for that
Wii U,
type.
like
Yeah,
the
he lives
Wii
for
U
that
is
type of arbitrage.
truly rare.
I was gonna say that's not gonna be anyone's formative console, but it's like a rare
I
duck
didn't
league.
even see one of those when they were out.
It's sold like 300 copies at least, probably.
Yeah.
Might make it a lot more valuable. All right,
Yeah.
Well,
and we're live.
exactly.
So today we're just doing another hot take episode, as it's been a few months, and I think we can just jump right into it. Hubbard, you want to kick it off?
Sure. So this one's a little tricky to like formulate or whatever, but basically it's on imposter syndrome. So I guess most people probably have heard of it, but if you haven't, it's like essentially like tons of people report feeling like imposters when they get like a new job. They get like a job that they've never had before, and that's like a step up from what they had, and they're doing the job and they feel like they're imposters in their role. And like so much of the conventional advice is basically like, oh yeah, like everyone feels that way. It's just because it's a new thing and blah blah blah, and like you'll like figure it out and it'll take a while and then you won't feel like that anymore. Blah blah blah. It's like brushed off as no big deal. And my hot take on that is like basically the reason imposter syndrome exists and the reason it's so prevalent is like basically everyone's like falling massively short of like what the jobs actually entail. And so like they come into a role and then they get told like what they're supposed to be doing. Like just take a random example. It's like, so you like get a financial analyst job and the person tells you like, oh,
Are
you're supposed
are
to
you going after me in particular?
maybe. But they're like, you're supposed to like you say you get a financial analyst job and you're like like you start talking to your coworkers, you start talking to your manager, and they tell you like the theoretical expectation of the job, which is like you're supposed to be providing such and such reports, of such and such quality and depth, about such and such financial situation to make future expectations and bets or whatever. And the reason that you like your imposter syndrome goes away is not because you learn the job and get good at it, or that's like a very minimal part. It's just like you realize like nobody actually works to their job expectation and they're just like doing like a quarter of what they should be doing, and everyone is doing that. So then you just get used to the notion that like, yeah, I'm useless and so is everyone else, therefore I'm not an imposter. But it's like your actual role, like you are falling massively short of it if you were actually like taking it seriously and doing what you were like quote unquote supposed to. And there is like 1 in like 50 people that would do that job and would actually do it correctly, and you would be a massive imposter compared to them. So that's like why you're getting imposter syndrome, is like the ideal for that role is actually just so far above you that you will never be able to do it, and then you just come to terms with that.
That's really funny, and I agree. I don't think it's like true in all cases for sure, but like in some of the jobs that I've had, that's definitely the case where like I've come into a role where I was fresh out of college, but everybody is like, oh my god, I have no idea what I'm doing, and like this is impossible. And it's like, well, and then 3 years later people are like, oh yeah, now I kind of know what I'm doing. It's like, no, I know everybody's not doing the job to the standard that they're supposed to, because I see the work generated by everybody and on the various teams that I dealt with, and it's like, this is definitely not up to like what the actual like regulations require. So it's like you know more than obviously when you started, but you're definitely not doing the job to the standard that is supposed to be attained.
Yeah, you're just adapting to like the absolute bare minimum standard that is set by the fact that everyone around you is an incompetent moron, and so are you, and therefore like it's okay. And there's like, but there is out like the thing is like, for most of these jobs there is someone out there that is actually competent and is doing the job like more or less how it's supposed to be done, and you're just like, yeah, like that is the person that you're in the back of your mind always measuring yourself against, because that's kind of like the job description gets based on like that theoretical person that's actually like
The
doing it
platonic
properly.
ideal.
Yeah, and there is someone that's like pretty
The platonic
close to that,
ideal financial analyst.
well, yeah, isn't an imposter. It's like, but everyone else is like, they're actually not like really. And but I think for so many of those jobs, right, it's like because they're like very bullshitty, like because most people
There's a
that
lot of
report,
play
like,
in the
imposters-
joints to do
Yeah,
nothing.
most people that report like imposter syndrome, like if you look at like, it's all industries that are like very wishy-washy, usually like, yeah, wishy-washy, you know, like kind of bullshitty jobs that are not like direct physical jobs. It's like not many welders are like, oh, I'm an imposter, I have imposter syndrome, and because that,
you
those
either
jobs are,
welded
like,
the joint correctly or you didn't, and it exploded, and now you're in trouble, or
Yeah, and it's
shattered
like-
under stress.
well, and your fuck ups actually matter, right? Like, so it's like if you are just like doing the job correctly to like a decent standard, it's obvious. And if you're not, then it's also obvious, and you're gonna get fired. It's just like in all the bullshitty jobs, it's like, yeah, you can be like a complete, you know, dud, which is like the median person is a dud in those jobs. Like, let's just be honest, and they just get away with it because there's not really any like proper metrics.
It's because everybody else
to,
is
like,
duds. So it's like,
And
you're
well,
gonna fire 90% of the employees? Probably not.
Well, and it's also because like I think knowledge work, especially like the knowledge work landscape, is like massively Pareto distributed, where it's like there's like that one guy that's like backpacking the whole department. It's
Yeah.
like,
Oh yeah, I definitely saw that too.
9 out of 10 people are just like riding on his coattails or her coattails and just being like, oh yeah, like I'm definitely doing the same.
I think any
quality
knowledge
as he
worker
is.
who went through school who had to do group projects, you probably saw that like in action. That was pretty easy to like it was on full display, right? Like one guy or a girl does a ton of the work, gets the whole thing put together. Basically everybody else, except for maybe one other person in like a 6-person group, does a bit, and then everybody else does the absolute bare minimum, phones it in. Like I saw that
That was
all the
me.
time at college.
Well, and as you scale up group size, the more people, the more and more freeloading there is. Like that's how like Pareto distribution works. As you scale up the group size, the number of freeloaders and the amount that the top percentiles contribute increases. So it just gets worse the bigger and more like, yeah, larger your organization is.
I just want to throw in there on the topic of welding. In my limited experience in the oil patch, that idea that you show up and you sort of realize everyone else is doing nothing that's like the crash course in the oil field. You show up, pull a quote unquote 12-hour day, and then you kind of feel bad because you sat around on your ass all day for 9 hours and did 3 hours of work. But then you realize the other guys only did 2 hours of work, and then you realize everyone's only doing a couple hours of work and they're just sitting on their ass for the rest of the 12 hours. And it's not quite imposter syndrome, but it's like there's definitely that sort of very quick acclimatization to the culture that, like, this is just what it is.
That's why factory jobs are so bad, because you actually have to work.
Yeah.
To literally work the whole time you're on the floor. Same with call centers and shit. Like the jobs.
Yeah,
that you actually
everything's
have to work.
tracked.
Another one, farming. It was just like, oh yeah, you just have to actually work for a couple weeks. It's like, it's tough times, especially up in the areas where you can farm. There's usually a lot of jobs where you don't have to work as much.
Yeah. Farming is it's a lifestyle for sure.
Yeah,
There's,
if
like,
Clarkson's
you
farm
don't have the
taught me
option of-
anything, it's not the pleasant, easy job that people think it is.
Yeah, you don't have the option of slacking when you have to work. because
Yeah,
you
you're
only
gonna
have a
work.
couple
You gotta
week
work like a
window.
madman, night, like sunrise to sunset, even well into the night.
There's no imposter syndrome farming, is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I think that about sums it up. But yeah, I just think it's
yeah,
more
that's a good point.
adaptation to just not the
Mediocrity.
fact that you're never going to live up to what you should actually be doing for most people. And like you said, there's a little bit of like getting to know what you're doing more. But I think like 80% of it is just like setting your expectations lower for what you actually have to do.
I think there's a proper word for that. But such a
Dog
good-
fuck.
No, but just like the lowering of your own expectations so that you can pass the bar of your own expectations more easily.
I'm sure there's a German word for it.
Oh, fuck.
You know there is.
It's just not pronounceable in like 40 or 50 letters long.
Called a word, but it's actually 15 words just conjugated together.
Yeah.
Goddamn Germans. Okay, well, I think that's about all I got for that one.
All right, Price, you're up.
Okay, so I feel like this kind of segues off a similar idea, or, it can be seen in the same vein. But I think there's an enormous misconception with everyone about money, in that, especially you see it in politics and what politicians promise, such that the average voter seems to believe that money solves problems, and a lot of people I talk to in real life seem to believe that money solves problems. And I think the misconception there is that people solve problems, and you can use money to exchange for the work of those people that solve the problems. But in your normal life as a normal person in Canada or in other free market economy, that is pretty much as simple as you have to understand the relationship between money and solving problems, is you can pay somebody to solve the problem. But when you get to the macro scale, sort of government, or even worse, UN, and people start to conflate solving problems with just requiring more money, and then you see the really ridiculous things. Like, I believe it was one of the UN guys said Elon Musk could stop starvation with $8 billion. For instance, Canada spent over $4 billion, and we still haven't got clean drinking water to our native reserves in Canada, which is, I'd imagine, a much simpler problem than world hunger. Like, the scale of the problems, there just isn't the sort of manpower available to be purchased and deployed. Like, your money required is absurd for a lot of these sort of societal problems.
I definitely agree, and I think like something that I've seen with like inflation getting back in the news cycle, like people just also don't understand. They conflate money with like goods in that same way, where they think like, oh well, if inflation is happening, just give people more money.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like,
The
you can say
NDP
that,
solution. The NDP
that's
classic.
the start of the like it's the inflation is more money chasing the same amount of goods.
Yeah,
You need to
you gotta
increase the number of
produce
goods,
more.
guys.
Yeah. You have to get more productive, and then that will start to take care of inflation.
Well, and I also saw I saw Musk. I think he was on a BBC interview. I think it was during his BBC interview, and he was making this point. He was just saying like, yes, if you gave everyone right now $1 trillion, that would not solve everyone's problem, because then everyone would have $1 trillion and they go try to solve their problems, and lo and behold, there wouldn't be enough actual goods and services to solve all the problems. It's not like the $1 trillion would have like, magically made there be more doctors and more homes and stuff. It's
Yeah, exactly.
Shocking. The real world, and I think that's what's the phrase? The map is not the territory.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that's like people get that conflated with like money and then the real world all the time, and they think like the financial system is the real world, and no, it's just like our like tracking. It's just an information system
Exactly.
assigned to the real world, and it's just for tracking purposes. And it's like you can't actually just mess with the tracking system and the information system to solve the real world problems. Like
a good example of
have,
that is like the financial statements of a company. It's like those are just pieces of paper that have numbers on them that represent what's going on in the company. They aren't the company. Like you can't just like, add an extra, $1 million to someone's like their equipment on their financial statement and then all of a sudden that appears. It's like, no, that it's just a representation, a best guess at what's the reality on the ground.
Yeah, I find it. The reason I think it's a hot take is I find it so difficult to try and explain the principle to, like, say you're a slightly above average individual who's like smart enough to get that they like some ideas of socialism or communism or wealth distribution, anything along those lines, and they think, oh, there should never be a billionaire because imagine how much good could be done with their money, and like that also bleeds into the idea that people think a billionaire has $1 billion in the bank, but they think that getting clean drinking water is as simple as for them fixing their faucet in their kitchen, and they can just call up a handyman and pay him. But I think that this kind of plays into that previous point where the majority of people, like human capital, has got to be the most important resource in the world. Like those small percentage of people that do everything that actually make the world go round are in high demand at almost all times. And you can't just pluck them up from one project to go solve another world important project.
Well, and like you were talking about world hunger, and it's more than just like the people and like the resources for a lot of that. A lot of the problem with like say world hunger is like just political unrest that makes
strife.
You could have literally, trucks and trucks of food and people willing to deploy it. It's just like the country is in civil war and nobody's willing to no matter what the price is willing to drive a truck full of food into a fucking active war zone, and therefore people starve. And it's like, well, that's, again, like it's not a resource problem.
Get hijacked because they're not military fighters. And then you have to hire a mercenary group to protect the food convoys, and then you're a participant in the war.
Well, yeah, and then now you've started World War III because you tried to solve world hunger without like thinking beyond, the narrow problem, right? And
I do have a kind of like a slight pushback. It's more against like I think this smaller scale that Price you kind of mentioned. Like when you get to the macro scale, things change a bit, but like money can solve a lot of problems when you're dealing with just a person who, if you're just a regular person, you don't have a lot of money, and then you get a bunch of extra money somehow. Like just say you win the lottery, and maybe it's not for like like $150 million, but like the point is, it's like, okay, now you don't have to worry about you had to repair your car. Well, you just won $25,000. It's like, bang, you have that money to solve that problem with your car. You can actually go to a mechanic, pay him, get it fixed, problem solved. Like the money solved the problem, right? But like, I just think it's good to delineate out that from like the macro scale, because then it's like,
I think, Grant, that I believe that is where the problem arises, is that in most people's daily experience, money does solve problems.
Yeah.
But then they believe that problem solving is done by money.
Yeah, exactly.
Rather than thinking of it as like, no, it's not the $25 an hour, $30 an hour you paid the handyman that solved the problem. It's the handyman that solved the problem.
Yeah,
I think that's just,
and then when you scale it up, like you can't, like you don't, like the human capital isn't there. Like, it's tied up in other places. It's like, yeah, that guy you paid to fix the car, well, he wasn't doing anything that day, so he could just get in there and fix it. So yeah, it's fine. But it's like, yeah, when you're scaling up to much bigger projects, there are also massive like coordination problems, all sorts of different things that come into play. Where it's like, yeah, you could throw $1 trillion at something, but it's like, well, these guys are working, like if you wanted to say like solve like who knows, some mega scale project, it's like where are you even going to find all the experts that you need?
$1 trillion.
What's that?
Making reserves livable. $1 trillion, easy.
You you joke about that, but that might actually be what it would cost.
Well,
to
it's
do
just
it across all Canadian reserves.
It's just money is just like a stand-in for value, right? And it's like, again, like if you only have so much, you only have so much productive capacity. So especially at the government scale, they can't, like, one hand can be taken from the other. Where, like, say you put in $100 billion to fixing reserves. Well, there's going to be a ton of tradespeople then that aren't available to solve housing problems in downtown Toronto or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, there's literally a limited number of tradespeople. Half of them are now in fucking nowhere, Northern Ontario, building infrastructure, and now they can't work on projects in the
and when your heat goes out in your house in Toronto, you're like you're screwed now.
And so once you get to that scale, there's no play there. You're not at a marginal level, and there's not enough play to, like, in the supply demand.
I think that's actually a really good. It's a really good point that people would do extremely well to understand, and I would say I agree with you, Price. It's like the vast majority of people, I don't think they get that at all. Like, they just can't even comprehend that, which is really weird because it's not that complicated of a point. But
here's a mini hot take: most people will never understand that, and it's like a complete losing battle trying to convince people.
Well, it's like trying to convince people about how marginal taxes work. It's just like
just think of it in the back of my head while they tell me how much Jeff Bezos could save the world if he wasn't such a selfish, rich capitalist bastard. And I'm like, I don't think Jeff Bezos could do much, honestly. Like, he could try his best. Maybe he is trying his best, but I don't think it would have a huge effect.
He's busy sending cock rockets into space, so he's got that to deal with.
People don't imagine if the government announced that they're expropriating all of Musk's stock in Tesla, and they're going to use it to solve world hunger. What do you think the stock would be worth the next day?
Zero.
Immediately. Like, people don't. Yeah, it's just. But again, like, explaining financial stuff to people is just such a losing battle. Even like you said, moderately sophisticated people, it just seems like you're just pounding your head into a fucking wall.
Yeah, like, I would say, like the people that I feel like should be able to get it that don't are, like, they've, university undergraduate sort of level. It's like you think they should, but they don't, and they probably never will, as you're saying.
No, I've had too many of those conversations just to have any faith that
even your
more than a tiny percentage of people will understand, like, basics. Like, you still see, like Con was saying, you see, like, people that don't understand marginal tax rates, and those are, like, lots of educated people don't get that. And that is, like, a very narrow basic concept. The other one that also, like, is like so pervasive that you just cannot fathom it is people confuse revenue and profit, like, daily. And they're just like, man, like, this company made like $200 billion and yet they didn't pay any taxes. It's like, because they literally lost like $20 billion that year. Like, they lost money.
$220 billion in expenses.
They're going to go bankrupt the next year and you want them to pay taxes. It's like, that is your financial knowledge on display. Let's just not have this conversation.
And then they wonder why they're like, I can't afford cost of living's too high. It's like, well, have you ever looked at your own finances and figured that one out? Like, you kind of have revenue and expenses. Like, you apply that knowledge.
That meme about where somebody puts something egregious on their finances and says they can't figure it out, it's just way too true.
Yeah.
$800 a month in candles. It's like, man, I just, like, there's nowhere to cut fat. It's impossible, guys. I guess I'll just be a renter forever.
F.
No sympathy.
And Price, you got any
respects?
Yeah, any final?
Pretty well sums it up. It wasn't the most cohesive take, but it's just something I've noticed, and it's a hot take because of the fact that I'm sure people will never understand.
They'll re-out about it for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess I can launch into mine. Both of mine are going to be a little bit incoherent. But my first one is, about the like drag queen reading hours and drag queen all ages shows and drag queen like competitions for kids. And I contend that like a lot of this shit started with the child pageant shows, and like I don't see any pushback against that. So I kind of like think it's like a lot of the people bitching and complaining about them now, it's like, well, you kind of had a setup to this before and you didn't seem to have a problem with it then, and so it's kind of your fault. Like, looking at the child pageant show, like I looked up like child pageant shows because I remember seeing them like years and years ago and thought this was really fucking weird. Like toddlers and tiaras, like I just remember feeling gross seeing those ads. And you just look up some of the images from these or videos from these things. It's like you get yourself put on a list for sure, because a lot of the outfits the kids are wearing are really sexualized. It's fucking gross. And I just think like, you know, like where are all these like, you know, like more of the conservative commentator types, like why weren't you bitching about this stuff? Like this stuff is.
I thought there was some pushback against child beauty pageants.
Yeah, like, there definitely was, but it was never like truly. It mostly even came from the left.
This is a pretty lukewarm take from you, I think, because I definitely see like a lot of people bring up that point, and like I don't see anyone like dying on that hill. I guess is my point. Is like I've never seen anyone like online or any like commentator being like, oh well, it's totally different and we should definitely keep child pageants. Like I think that's like the point of like a lot of people's criticism of like the drag shows for children is like why push it, and like why keep supporting it when it's clearly fucked up. And again, like I'm wrong, but I have not seen like, you know, Ben Shapiro or some other conservative commentator come out and be like, protect our drag or protect our beauty pageants, hashtag not equal or something. Like I don't know. I'm
not saying that, but it's just kind of odd to me that there hasn't been like a lot of this. I guess it's like surprising that I didn't see more of like pushback back then from like the more like conservative spaces, but maybe I had a wrong read on it. But it just like another part of the hot take is like the child pageant shows also kind of set this stuff up.
I would say it's a warm take, because I agree with you that conservative like the child pageant stuff is definitely like most popular, it seems like, in like the southern states.
Yeah, exactly. It seemed like more of a red state conservative thing, and you have lots of parents up in arms over that. But I didn't see the same reaction for pageant shows when they're clearly highly exploitative. And like when I remember seeing this stuff, like the people who were like enraged about it were all like the leftist college kids. They're like, this is fucking awful. Like, what are you doing?
That's actually a good. I think it was an entirely different cohort that was upset about child pageants, if I'm remembering correctly, because I mean, these things were a big deal when I was a kid.
Yeah, like it was like, to me, like
it's always making fun of the parents that would put their kid in child pageant.
Yeah, it was always like the elite, like, you know, I ran around with obviously like leftist circles then, and those were the people who were really upset about it. They're like, this is clearly child exploitation. So it's just a part of it is like of the hot take is like, it's just hilarious that it's flipped. Now it's all the fucking weirdo leftists who are bitching about this that seem to be fine with the drag queen stuff.
The only other like thing I would say is like, I do think there's something creepier about having adults who are showing off sexually and saying sexual things to kids
than putting the kids in the situation
and then having kids all together in like
they're like Disney kind of costumes that get a little bit on the like
that get too risque for sure.
Yeah,
and I think
they're not the same.
To be fair, like also like I think child pageants, like there's this is true also of drag shows, I would assume, but like there's a spectrum of like creepiness for child pageants where I'm sure some are like reasonably tame and probably not problematic at all, where it's like like more or less just like talent shows for little kids, which is like I don't know,
it's
like,
hard to bitch about that.
Kids probably like them. And then there's then that runs the gamut to like very creepy, weird, overly sexualized like creep fests. And again, I think that you can make the same point on the drag show stuff, which is like there's some that are like probably pretty normal, and like most people would not really bat an eye, and then it goes all the way to the gamut of like insanely depraved fucking feet first stuff where you're like, Jesus Christ, like
Yeah,
Wasn't
like
there
immediately
episode?
lock that drag queen up. Like they are 100%
doing that shit in
predators.
front of kids is like that definitely feels like a crime.
Yeah,
Wasn't there like a Sunny episode where they hosted a child beauty pageant?
Yeah,
And it
there
was
is.
just basically riffed on it for the whole time about like the I think they made it so that the kids were trying to hypersexualize it to get more support.
that sounds exactly like the Sunny take on it.
If I remember correctly, it was
I haven't
mostly
seen
just like not supposed to be sexual at all, and then it became sexual, or it like accidentally became sexual, and yeah, it was pretty good though.
But yeah, like they were definitely mocking it for sure, and like the principle behind it of being just weird.
I would definitely say, like, agree with you, Hubbard's. Like, the drag queen stuff definitely feels worse, like, qualitatively worse, just because you do have, it's the adults. Like your drag is an obvious sexual kink. Like, anybody who tries to argue that it's not is, like, completely delusional or just flat out lying. Like, drag has always been a kink. Like, that's been well accepted within the community. Like, it's freely admitted until now. So to me, that like drag queen reading hour, drag queen competitions, all of that shit is just like it definitely seems on a whole other level of gross. But yeah, I guess my point there was like, it seems weird that the whole thing kind of flipped.
Well, that's typical in this day and age. I think the reason I find the drag stuff like more the qualitative difference there that I find worse is like there is adults that you can tell are actively sexualizing stuff with children, whereas in like the pageant thing, it's like it's more like the kids. You could interpret it as they're sexualizing the kids, but like it's not. I don't know. It's just like they
don't have nude fake tits plastered on, whereas a lot of the drag queen shit does, like completely naked too.
Well, it would just be like if it would. I guess like to get as weird as the drag show stuff, you'd have to have like some weird guy like jerking off in the corner at a fucking child pageant for me to.
Which there might be.
Yeah, well, yeah, but like it does seem like there is some degree of like gatekeeping at those things where they do try to keep the creeps away. I don't know, but again, I'm sure some of them are like cesspools that are just like as bad as the drag shit. I don't know. I haven't been to any of either version, so I can't personally say
on it either.
I think the very very cold take is like they should both be fucking shot into the sun.
Yep. I think losing child pageant shows by getting rid of the drag shit would be a sacrifice worth taking.
And then anyone who complains about either going away, just there you go.
You just get labeled, and you have to go to all your neighbors, and you have to state that you've committed a crime.
Good litmus test there. It's like I don't mind dissociating from anyone who's dying on the hill of child pageants and or drag shows.
Yeah. It's like keep yourself and your kids far, far, far away from anybody who enjoys either of those. That's all I had. If you want to do your next one, Hubbards. Unless, Price, you got something more to say.
No, I don't have a lot to contribute on that one.
All right, let's not beat a dead horse then.
So my next hot take is probably not that hot, but it's also not certain, but I feel it in my bones. And that is basically just that nuclear, it has been and is continuing to be like undermined by big oil. And that's the reason we don't have nuclear plants all over the place and cheap, affordable, clean energy already is literally just big oil. It's like, nah, nuclear is way too actually effective and good. and so fuck it. And
I think you mean dangerous and scary.
yeah, and I think I don't know. Like, there's been so many, stories coming out about big oil, like funding climate act. Like for example, like big oil in the United States funds environmentalist groups in Canada to shut down Canadian energy production because they don't want the competition. And you also had like early electric vehicles being shut down by big oil lobbying. And yeah, there's like tons of provable cases of big oil using their money and influence and lobby power to fuck over things that would screw them. And I just think like nuclear definitely was like the biggest of the big impediments to making money for big oil.
It's kind of come out that like the bread and butter has been to pay protesters, and that's obviously take advantage of the not in my backyard mentality. Like spin the idea that nuclear reactors are super dangerous and bad, and then get protests anytime anyone wants to do something, as well as obviously lobbying in government because you have billions of dollars in lobby groups and making stringent regulations that cost the nuclear companies billions of dollars to make a nuclear facility to jump through all the hoops. Like, I could see a lot of ways they would get at these. Any sort of proposed nuclear projects would be bogged down at the very least, if not completely shuttered, by an active lobby group.
Yeah, and given like their Big Oil's track record, it seems. I would be absolutely shocked if they weren't doing that. Like, if they've done it with other things, like, why wouldn't they do it to nuclear?
I don't know how it is in Ontario, like on the ground in Ontario, but as a Canadian, you almost never hear about the fact that most of Ontario's electricity comes from nuclear. And that should be like a point of pride, right? Because it's clean energy. But they're just too scared to talk about it seems like.
I mean, yeah, they're probably just worried about it getting shut down and having to go to coal. But and I think like that's just like, again, like it's just so weird that every time a nuclear project gets shut down or a country goes off their nuclear, oh, what a coincidence! Coal and oil and natural gas just get like production and use, it goes through the roof because there's no other alternative that actually is affordable and scalable in that short period of time. And it's like shocking, like the industry that is set to benefit, it constantly does benefit from all these projects getting shut down. It's like, I don't know, seems just very odd to me that how little has been invested in nuclear for like 50 years, and it just doesn't seem odd after you think about like, oh, if there was a couple $100 billion behind a campaign to shit all over it, yeah, that might go a long way. And I think the other thing that also goes in that favor is like, nuclear doesn't really have a good lobby because it's usually run in concert with government because it's nuclear. Yeah. So it's like there's not a lot of private industry operating in the nuclear space, and therefore they're not going to have the same, like, it's not going to have the same amount of
lobby power
on its side, because it's like, yeah, the private money and the profits just aren't there. And again, nuclear is generally going to be run by some sort of state energy company, and there's no private incentive to undercut the hydrocarbon industry. Like, it's not like there's going to be some private investor group that can raise a couple $100 billion and like come into the US and build a bunch of nuclear and then make 10x what oil was making, because they won't let them run their own private nuclear. It's just the government has way too tight of control on nuclear in almost every part of the world for that to happen. So therefore, like, there's no problems.
Well, and also your time scale runs counter to what a lot of private industry, like your payoff period for a nuclear reactor is probably 40 years. Like, that's a lot longer than it makes private industry happy.
Yeah, payback period is pretty important.
That makes it difficult for like public like a publicly funded company to go in. I think you could have private companies, like some sort of private enterprise, that would be willing to, especially if they could get government like guarantees and tax rates and subsidies or whatever. But again, I think a big part of it is like governments generally don't let nuclear run privately, right? It's usually state-run companies that do it because it's fucking nuclear, and especially since most of our nuclear designs actually produce byproducts that are potential, problems for dirty bombs and whatnot. I think
your input in American designs is enriched uranium because it gives them an excuse to make enriched uranium for their nukes cheaper with economies of scale. Canadian nuclear reactors just use regular uranium, and they can also use the byproduct, the waste of the enriched uranium plants, or thorium if you're interested. The Indians are modifying a bunch of CANDU reactors to use thorium, I believe.
Yeah, so it's just crazy to me. Like, I'm no expert, but I feel like nuclear could have been way better utilized to create cheap and effective power.
I think we're at the point where
so many places,
hindsight's 2020, and we could say nuclear should have been a huge contributor to the electrical grid, if not the main source of electricity for climate reasons.
And yeah, I think you could write off a lot of like the hindsight bias stuff as like just that, right? But I think like the last 10 years in particular feel like very damning for there being something else going on with the fact that
there's something purposeful.
Bill Gates and the lads just basically saying nuclear is our only option, and it's still not acceptable. Like Germany just shut down its last 3 nuclear reactors, and they have some of the most prominent public figures in the world saying we need to do something with nuclear.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Where it's like now I'd say there's been like 5 or 6, maybe 10 years now of like people yelling about nuclear, and then countries still making the decisions to shut down their nuclear plants and not invest in more nuclear. And it's like at that point, it's just like it just seems impossible to explain it without some sort of fucked up incentives and lobbying.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't like. How can you be that? Like, I don't know. I get maybe German politicians are just literally that incompetent, but I don't know. It seems weird.
Well, these are the same politicians who decided the more natural gas they bought from Russia, the closer it'd bring Russia into the sphere of the free world. And same with the Chinese. The more they export and import it from China, just trade more with them, and then they'll happily join the free world.
Yeah, maybe it is completely explainable by just sheer stupidity and incompetence, but like that is
like the Americans put all their weight on Germany that they could, and Germany still was going through with that Nord Stream 2. And the only thing that stopped it was the
just
actual
literally
invasion
blowing
of
them
Ukraine by Russia. Otherwise it was going to be finished, and they were going to buy even more oil or even more natural gas from Russia.
Well, and they would have kept doing it, but then the States blew it up. Like, I guarantee you they would have just...
Russia blew it up. Didn't you hear the newest mainstream media take? It was Russia. They saw Norway spotted a Russian ship in the Baltic Sea around the same time.
Oh, what would a Russian ship be doing in the Baltic Sea? It's over. They're like, this is smoking gun.
Evidence. It's smoking a Russian ship in the Baltic Sea. It's over. Confirmed.
And there's no way an American sub would have been waiting until a Russian ship was spotted in the Baltic Sea to give it plausible deniability. That wouldn't happen.
And no way that America would ever coordinate with Norway to get their story straight like 3 months after the ordeal.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Nope, definitely not. The fact that Biden said he'd find a way to shut it down like a year before it got blown up. No, that's...
Yeah, it'll be a rusting hunk at the bottom of the sea.
I mean, Russia could have just kept it shut off, or they could have blown it up, and they chose to blow it up because they just stopped.
It's crazy like that.
Yeah, they wanted to flex on the fucking Ukrainians. They're like, yeah, we'll blow our own shit up. You don't know us. You don't know.
It's like the crazy man smashing his face on the ground or on the table to show him how crazy he is.
It's a Slavic thing. You guys wouldn't get it.
Yeah. Gopnik.
It's like, yeah. So that's my full spiel about nuclear being. I'm gonna call it a grand conspiracy and be happy with it. Also start the timer on the 6 months until proven correct. Get it out there.
All right, any more on that?
Sounds reasonable.
I know. I think price is up.
Okay, well, my hot take, probably. I'm going to say, even in America, it would be a hot take for the majority of people because gun owners are still not the majority, even in America. And in Canada, it's definitely a hot take. But it's basically the idea that handguns are predominantly a defensive weapon. And I think there's misconceptions about this. Well, this is on the Canadian perspective because a lot of the gang violence in Canada, and I think this would be the case in America, but I'm not certain because they have so much more access to better weaponry. But in Canada, a lot of the gang violence is pistols. But a lot of that gang violence is, standing next to a guy, which handshaking range, and then you pull out the pistol and shoot him, which is where a pistol is effective. So basically, I will add the caveat that it's a predominantly defensive weapon, but it is useful for assassinations because you can conceal it. And then I'll also say that another weapon that's useful for assassinations is a literal tube filled with homemade gunpowder fired at the ex-prime minister of Japan, shooting ball bearings, because when you're that close to a guy, you don't even need a pistol. You actually just need something that discharges lethal force, which you can make at home. So, with that out of the way, the reason that pistols are predominantly a defensive weapon is if you look into the actual, statistics of police shootings or things along those lines, you'll see that when they take down a suspect with a pistol, and a good marksman in the police they'll usually put a full magazine of ammunition into them. And there are at least a reasonable number of cases to the point where it's a complaint among police officers in the United States where a full magazine, which is about 15 rounds, does not kill somebody, especially if they're hopped up on drugs, because a pistol is not hitting. In the firearms community, there's an idea of how much force you need to cause hydrostatic shock that ruptures the organs of the body and basically knocks someone down or renders them incapable of continuing the fight. And that basically the theory in most of the firearms community that's accepted is that a pistol is just fundamentally not capable of that. So what you need to do is hit a vital organ that will kill the person. And hitting a vital organ with a pistol is not easy to do because pistols are hard to aim. And a rifle, on the other hand, hitting them in the torso will likely cause hydrostatic shock that incapacitates the person with a full-size rifle. Then there's arguments with how big of a rifle you need because, the old FUDs, they like their 30-06 and their 308, but a lot of people are happy with the 5.56. But what you see happening when people actually set out to kill a large number of innocent people, or non-innocent people if you're in a war, they don't take pistols. They take an assault rifle, and if you want to be pedantic, assault rifle doesn't have a definition, so they take a rifle that fires either an intermediate or full-size cartridge, because the longer barrel allows you to be more accurate. It allows you to fire a larger bullet because you've now shouldered it, so you can handle more recoil. And it will, simply put, kill people vastly more effectively than a handgun will. So, the main use of a handgun is pretty much this goes into misconceptions about medieval weaponry as well, but it's on the battlefield is the easiest way to draw the distinction, where a handgun you've got on your side usually is a rank of status because only the special forces or captains in a lot of countries will have pistols, and if you are in a country where the rank and file have pistols, then that pistol is your weapon of last resort. Like, basically, it's either you're going to die or you're going to get lucky with a pistol. But there's not much that you're going to do particularly effectively with a pistol, which is why it's often a status symbol more so than a practical weapon. And in Canada, because of this gang violence, to bring it back to the point, there's a huge push that I think will remain successful. They've now frozen handguns, and you can't buy them or transfer them, but you can still take them to the range and shoot them if you already own them. And it's because of this sort of public perception of gang violence and pistols. But if you look at even the mass shooting in Canada, all of them have been done with rifles. Like, you see it, the other area you see it is in TV shows, which is much more egregious, where people are just shoot a guy with a pistol once and he's dead. Very, very uncommon.
Oh, the best is also when it's like at like 150 yards.
Yeah. It's like...
Just pulls it out, just doesn't even really aim, just like general direction, snipes him in the head at 150 yards, pistol.
So,
easy.
If you watch the police videos, body cam footage of them shooting, as I was saying, it's usually a full mag dump because they want to kill the person because they fired their pistol. They're not joking around at that point. Their intention is to kill the person. So they put their full magazine.
But why don't they just shoot the gun out of their hand?
Yeah. And if you watch a cop show and there's a police killing, it's usually a single shot. And then the police officer's all remorseful because, they killed the person. But in reality, if you put one shot into a guy, which you wouldn't do because you probably wouldn't kill him, and your goal when shooting is to kill him. If you put one shot at them, you can probably run up to them, bandage them up, and take them to the hospital, and they'll be fine. Like, there's a reason rappers survive, I don't know, half a dozen gunshot wounds. Maybe they don't anymore, but back in the day, that was always their thing. But, like, they weren't surviving half a dozen rifle rounds. They're surviving half a dozen pistols.
Well, like another point to that, it's like you watch police shootings, and, like, the cops will mag dump somebody, and he's still moving around on the ground, and he just ate like 20 shots.
They aren't.
It's like
they usually aren't
he
dead,
can still,
but
yeah,
incapacitated by a mag dump, and they will be beyond saving usually by a mag.
Yeah,
dump.
but it's like the reason they're mag dumping him is like, imagine if he just got hit twice. Like, he's still dangerous. He can still pull up his gun and shoot you. It's like that's why they're mag dumping the guy, because like I've seen a lot of police shootings, and like I've seen a couple of them where they just, like, multiple cops mag dump, and the guy is still moving around and has like enough movement to like go for his gun, and so they just like reload and shoot more. Like, it's crazy. Like, I couldn't, like, yeah, like, unless you actually are educated on that, you would think like a couple of bullets and the guy's like beyond dead. It's like, no, not with a pistol. It's just it doesn't work that way. Like, unless you hit him straight in the face and, like, you know, get it right into his brain. It's but they don't, and again, they don't police are not taught for they don't do headshots. It's center of mass.
No one does headshots. Like, maybe gangsters, I don't know. They can do what they want, but military and police, it's all body shots because you cannot reliably hit a head.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially under the stresses of a combat situation.
And with a fucking handgun.
Yeah.
Well, so I was going to say, I would agree with your hot take that it's a mostly defensive weapon as long as you include defense against existential dread in there. You shoot yourself in the head, pretty effective. So yeah, suicide definitely very good weapon. Handgun definitely good defense there. So
I mean, to be fair, in Canada, the difficulty of acquiring handguns does not stop people killing themselves with firearms. Like, Canadians generally use shotguns, but yeah, so I'm sure Americans, a handgun's a lot easier.
I think that's a good hot take. I don't know.
I was going to say, just to back up, like, the police, like the RCMP or the Canadian Police Forces now have an AR-15 in the back of every squad car, because there are many situations that you can end up in, especially in a place like Toronto, where you need to kill somebody and a pistol just doesn't cut it. Like, the police officers themselves are carrying that pistol for self-defense, not combating an armed felon. If they know somebody has a gun, they're not going to be rocking up with their pistol.
Yeah.
Yeah, the handgun is a contingency insurance plan, not a primary tool when they know some shit's going down.
Yeah, well, whenever you see, like, cop raids, it's like all of the front guys always have rifles. And then sometimes guys in the back will have a pistol, but it's like they're always, like, the doorbusters and the guys that follow in, they're all rifled up.
Do you see the guys in the airports even always strapped with a AR-15, even in Canada.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you see that in other airports too. Yeah, they're not just walking around with their little side pistols.
I do think that's like why, if you do have like a strong opinion about guns, you should at least like try one. Like it's just
Well, there's so much like nuance when it comes to guns, and then a lot of people with strong opinions.
Yeah, but that's
Honestly,
how it works for
on either
everything.
side, they'll often have little knowledge. Like it's crazy how many people with guns don't understand their capabilities. Oh, this 45 ACP Colt 1911 will drop a guy, two world wars.
It's like, well, I think you haven't watched enough movies.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem. The movies are so bad.
Yeah, that's my
A
point.
pistol, the pistol's a one-shot kill, but a shotgun from 30 feet away are totally survivable because it's a shotgun.
Yeah, the guy goes flying and then he gets back up and attacks again. Yeah. I think it's classic Hollywood, just making everybody more retarded.
Yeah, I don't know if there's much more to explore. I just kind of ranted about the pistols there. Do you guys got anything to add?
No, I don't. Hubbard's?
no, not really. I think it's a good point.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so I have a couple other ones. They're all half baked, but I think I'll actually use a different one. This is like pertains to bot networks. Like people seem to be aware that there's like a lot of the internet conversations around like that take place on internet forums, like predominantly like text-based like Twitter and all of that. People seem to have this. They seem to be, at least in the West, aware that like it's like there are bot networks that operate and that are muddying the waters, but they seem to have this perception that it's only foreign hostile nations. Yeah, they're all Russians and maybe a couple Chinese and maybe like one or two Iranians, but like they don't seem to. I never see the it brought up that it's like I almost guarantee that the number one user of bot networks and propaganda on forums and text-based places and even elsewhere is going to be American. Like it's I find it very shocking that like
I'll do you one better. The JIDF is behind everything. You see that one talked about.
I don't know what
The Jewish Internet Defense Force.
Oh yeah, the Israeli one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's probably talked about in certain circles.
Certain
circles talk about that one. But like just generally like people are like, "Oh yeah, it's Russian misinformation." It's like you don't think your own government is capable of doing this too? Like, and that they don't? Like, especially after all of the various like CIA projects have come to light where they're, like all sorts of fucked up stuff that they practice.
Over a new leaf.
Well, I think I agree with you, and I think the way to think about it is like, who do you think is the predominant actor on Chinese websites in terms of like bots and control? Oh, it's probably the Chinese government. Who do you think's the primary actor in Russian websites? Well,
probably the Russian government.
And it's like, who do you think the primary actors are on like, predominantly American websites?
Definitely Chinese and Russian.
Yeah.
Definitely Russians this time. Yeah, the Russians do it all. Like, no, it's probably the fucking Americans. Yeah, I think most of the time you're going to have your own government being most active on the areas that the parts of the internet that their own citizens frequent the most, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly. And people don't seem to think that like they're like I guess my point there was like, that type of propaganda and activity is only the tool of despots. And it's like, okay, well, given all of the information that's come out about all of the things the CIA and NSA have done, like, why would you ever think that? Like, it's just, I find that wholly bizarre that people seem to trust their government to be operating above board and not, propagandize them.
I think a good example of sort of where this would be a logical continuity is the CIA running like Radio Free Europe and Radio Free Asia, where they just basically got super powerful radio towers and broadcast into all these other countries so that anyone could pick it up on their home radio. And it's like, yeah, but when they got the internet, they were like, oh, you know that propaganda stuff? That's so 70s, man. Like, we're done with
we would
that.
never do that. We've never do horrible experiments on people.
Like, what do you mean? We can talk directly to those citizens now? We don't want to do that. We just want to stick with these radios, blasting indiscriminately.
Yeah,
Well,
like, it's not a very in-depth one. But
I could expand on it. I think part of the another extension of that hot take is like, it's the same thing with like police shootings or whatever, or police misconduct, where like people are just continually surprised that police do bad things in the internet age because it's all caught on cell phone camera.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's the same, like the exact same process is playing out with governments, right? Where governments were always this shitty, or probably shittier. It's just they didn't get caught as easily back in, the radio era.
Yeah, exactly. It just wasn't
era,
being filmed all the time and
the,
posted on the internet.
Well, the information dissemination was just centralized, and therefore, like, a huge chunk of the bullshit that they were pulling was, cut off at the source and very easy to, stifle. And now you just have way more options in terms of, letting that through the cracks, or getting it through the cracks, I guess, if you're like someone who sees something, off. And so I think that, yeah, like, they've always, like Price was saying with the radio stuff, they've always been doing it. They're probably doing it even harder and more aggressively now that they are losing their grip because of the open nature of the internet. And it's just, we're finally being able to catch them consistently doing it because there's open information dissemination channels that they literally just cannot keep a lid on, right? Like, just...
And the other thing with the U.S. is they kind of double-edged swords themselves. Well, not really, I guess, because they have other means of censorship, but like the operating the Tor network, which criminals in the U.S. use at the very least, which annoys the U.S. But they operate that for a large part so that dissenters in other countries can, blow the whistle on whatever's going on, whether in China, Iran, or whatnot. Like, as an example of, internet psyops. I guess not psyops, internet technical warfare.
Well, I think they're just learning that I don't know. I think they are adapting to like the new information age, like, slowly. And I think they're realizing, like, now you can't like top down control everything as easily. So you have to do it
a lot more subtly.
Yeah. And I think it's more about like, you have to be sneaky about it in the sense of like, it's easier to say, just allow, say you have like a problematic idea that's coming into the mainstream. It's easier just to let it like proliferate, but then basically add a bunch of baggage onto it so that it seems crazy. It gets out there, but you've made it seem crazy and untenable by
that's my favorite.
By attaching a bunch of other baggage to it, rather than actually just suppress it, right? Like, suppressing it won't work because people will eventually figure it out. But if you can like
spin a narrative in the direction that you want.
Well, that's like trucker protest.
Yeah,
100%. I was gonna say that's the best example. Is like, that was like the best example of it, where it's like, just like throw a bunch of shit on the truckers protest that literally has no basis in reality. And like, I think it'll be a long time before if we ever do figure out, but I guarantee you, I basically can guarantee that there was state actors with the Nazi flag and the all sorts of other shit to...
Oh yeah, and even like saying in Parliament, saying they want an insurrection. I've heard them say they want an insurrection. It's like the whole truckers convoy is about vaccine mandates, and then saying just whips this out in a public space when he knows a bunch of people will watch and CBC will clip it. And then people are like, oh yeah, that truckers convoy wants an insurrection.
Well, and then the CBC is saying, oh, it was funded by American MAGAs.
Yeah.
Like, they did a report on themselves, and they found, like, crazily, they found information that confirmed their bias. Like, oh, that's... But again, like, that, rather than just suppressing the story... I mean, there was suppression to a degree, too. Like, they just didn't cover, like, the actual on-the-ground protests, but they did a lot of coverage. It was just coverage that made it look crazy, right? Like, or tried to paint it as unhinged as they could, even though like 99% of people that were there were just normal, regular Canadians that were just having a good time. And like I was there in person, and like the vibes,
you live close enough
there, yeah. And the vibes there were like just completely different than what was on the news about it. And yeah, it's just not even compared. Like, it wasn't the same story that was on the news that was actually on the ground.
All I can say is I hope every single one of those truckers from northern areas put down that Ottawa trip as their expense on their taxes.
Should have claimed moving expenses.
Yeah, true.
I don't know how long to stay, but 4 weeks, good enough. There and back moving expenses. I mean, the CRA is on strike, right? So it's not like they're going to get audited.
Pull a fast one on them.
There's nobody doing the audits anymore. I guess audit is not on strike, but
it doesn't sound as fun that way, though.
You got anything?
No, I didn't really have anything else on that.
I'll just say on a micro level that if you're ever in an argument in an anonymous part of the internet, that you can absolutely apply this tactic of adding baggage on and false flagging as being on the other side, and then just making their position sound extra ridiculous. And absolutely, like, that's guaranteed banger way to win an argument. Because you can just make them sound so retarded, or make them sound as though they're associated with people that are not retarded. And like, unless you don't go, if you go overboard, people will realize it. But like, if you just kind of ease into it, it works really good.
Accelerationism.
Well, no, just like if you don't have a valid way to counter an argument, or like you don't feel as though they're receptive to a valid way, like you just you pretend to join their side and then make them sound extra retarded. It's like false flagging 101.
It's actually probably pretty...
No, it works super well because people are too retarded to realize other people do that to them.
Yeah. Like, I'm sure that is actually done quite a bit.
I do it. Like, not often, but like, when you really got to.
When you got to get into the trenches,
Yeah, like, those meme boys don't fight themselves.
Sometimes you're called to duty, and what are you going to do? Decline? Like, what are you, a coward? Bravery takes different shapes in this modern era. Sometimes you do just have to pretend to be retarded.
Yeah. For the greater good.
All right.
That's about does her then?
I think that about does her.
Sounds good.
Thanks for listening.
All right.
Peace.
Peace.